Good evening and welcome. My name is John Hughes. I'm an editor for Bloomberg First Word, which is our breaking news desk here in Washington, and I am the president of the National Press Club. We are the world's leading professional organization for journalists. We are committed to our profession's future through programs just like this, and we fight for a free press worldwide. For more information, visit our website, press.org. To donate to programs offered through our club's Journalism Institute, visit press.org/institute. On behalf of members worldwide, I want to welcome you all here in our live audience to today's Newsmaker dinner. I'd also like to welcome our C-SPAN and public radio audiences. You can follow the action on Twitter by using the hashtag NPCDinner. Remember, the public attends our dinners. Applause is not evidence of a lack of journalistic objectivity. After our guest speech, we'll have a question and answer period. I will ask as many questions as time permits. Our head table includes guests of our speaker and also working journalists who are club members. Let me introduce them to you now. I'd ask each person to stand briefly as names are announced. From the audience's right, Baha El Tawil, Washington correspondent for Egypt's On TV network. Kathy Bonk, Executive Director of Communications Consortium Media Center and a member of the NPC Journalism Institute Board. Rachel Oswald, Foreign Affairs Writer for CQ Roll Call and Vice Chair of the NPC Press Freedom Committee. Wu Hongbo, UN Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs and a guest of our speaker. Jeff Ballou, News Editor for Al Jazeera Media Network and Vice Chairman of the NPC Board of Governors. Donna Leinwan Leger, breaking news reporter for USA Today, Vice Chair of the Speakers Committee, and a former NPC president. Skipping over our speaker for a moment, Kasia Klemasinska, Treasury reporter for Bloomberg News and the Speakers Committee member who organized today's dinner. Thank you, Kasia. Hervé Ladsus, UN Undersecretary General for Peacekeeping Operations and a guest of the speaker. Hideyomi Kinoshita, Washington Bureau Chief for Kyodo News. Dina Fine-Marin, Associate Editor and Journalist for Scientific American. Mark Woino, Senior Associate Editor at Kiplinger's Personal Finance and Treasurer of the National Press Club. The United Nations celebrates its 70th birthday later this year. That's 7 decades of international peacekeeping, humanitarian aid, assistance with economic development, and support of human rights. While particulars of the UN agenda change from time to time, the underlying goal has remained constant: to prevent another conflict like World War II. Ban Ki-moon, the former foreign minister of South Korea, is serving his second term as UN Secretary General. He has been on the job since 2007, and he is the 8th person to hold this post. During Ban's tenure, the UN has responded to crisis in Darfur, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, the effects of global warming, and terrorism. Ban also faces challenges such as water shortages worldwide, the Ebola outbreak in Western Africa, and civil conflict in Ukraine and Syria. Despite these immediate challenges, he has focused on long-term goals as well, such as ending violence against women and improving education for the largest generation of young people the world has ever known. One of Bond's predecessors said the position of Secretary General is, quote, the most impossible job on earth, end quote. We look forward to hearing the secret of how to handle a job such as this. Please join me in giving a warm National Press Club welcome to United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon.
Thank you for your very kind introduction, Mr. John Hughes, President of the National Press Club, distinguished members of the NPC, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor and pleasure to meet with you, and thank you for your kind invitation, and thank you for your taking time today. I know that you are eager to have tonight's main course. I know that you have finished your main course, but you must be more interested in main course. This is a question and answer session. I look forward to that. But before that, I'd like to say a few words as some food for thought. Recently, I asked one of our very senior advisors who has been working longer than definitely 40 years, long-serving advisors. I asked him, because I have been so much troubled by all this, what is happening in this world. By the way, have you ever seen, during your 40-year-plus life with the United Nations, such a time when we are having so many fires taking place all around the world at once, at a time like this way? I can name at least 10 hotspots immediately in addition to continuing economic difficulties around the world. He said he has never experienced such time. It is mostly one or two crises happening here and there. But now we have at least 10 headline newses, headline crisis. In addition to this headline crisis you follow a daily basis, we have many forgotten crises or frozen crises. I would not name which are the forgotten or frozen cases. You will know better than I do because you have been following all the times. We face really many crises at once. There are minimum 50 million refugees around the world. That's our job, to provide daily food, sanitation, water, education. This is a huge, huge burden. There are many people who are sick, many people who are out of school, many children. United Nations responsibility is getting more and more tougher and tougher. The United Nations has appealed $16 billion to cover humanitarian relief for this year. Almost 5 times what we needed a decade ago. There's a huge increase, exponential increase. Billions of people face hatred and persecution. Billions suffer from hunger and exploitation. And billions of dollars continue to be squandered on nuclear weapons and other arsenals. Beyond these numbers, we see several transformative trends. First, new economic powers have emerged. Second, more people are migrating than ever before, seeking better opportunities. Now more people live in mega cities. People are coming to the cities, making a lot of problems for good governance. Extremism and terrorism and crimes have taken on more virulent forms. Extreme weather patterns are hitting our world and destroying and killing many people and infrastructures. States alone cannot solve these problems. Not a single country, however powerful or resourceful one may be. For example, we are living in the United States. People often immediately think that United States is the most powerful, most resourceful country. US cannot do it alone. They look to the United Nations. United Nations cannot handle this alone. We need collective power, solidarity. Otherwise, our world will get more and more troubles. Ladies and gentlemen, millions of people continue to suffer from the devastating consequences of governance failures, injustice, inequality, violations of human rights, and unbearable poverty. Now let me just mention several cases. But what I'm going to say is not all, but they are some of very serious situations. Let us think about Syria. This is the 5th year where Syrian people have been abandoned, killed, and displaced, and refugeed. Meanwhile, the parties continue to show little or almost no willingness to solve this through dialogue. This is why I have asked my special envoy, Stefan de Mistura, to do maximum efforts to relaunch a political dialogue as a way to implement Geneva Communique. If anyone is truly seriously about engaging in meaningful negotiations to end this nightmare, he has to work on this matter. I would like to make a special plea on behalf of Palestinians in the Yarmouk refugee camps in Damascus. They are caught between the military machine of the Syrian government and the brutality of extremist group Daesh and ISIL. They have little way out, and the aid can find a little way in. And their suffering is largely out of the spotlight. I have been working very hard recently to protect all these 18,000 people who have been trapped in between government forces and Daesh terrorists. There are at least 3,500 children who need our immediate protection. Yemen is also in flames. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Valerie Amos, who is now taking care of all these humanitarian work. So welcome. Even before the latest escalations, 2 out of 3 Yemenis relied on humanitarian assistance. Levels of food insecurity were higher than in the poorest stretches of Africa. The recent fighting has only multiplied the sufferings and insecurity. Hundreds are dead. Humanitarian supplies are being blocked. And UNICEF has reported that an astounding of 1/3 of the fighters are children. That is why I'm calling for an immediate ceasefire in Yemen by all the parties. It is time to support corridors of life-saving aid and the passage to real peace. The Saudis have assured me that they understand that there must be a political process. I call on all Yemenis to participate in good faith. The United Nations-supported diplomatic process remains the best way out of a drawn-out war with terrifying implications for regional stability. In Nigeria, our hope is that the new government can promote return to normalcy and a return home for the school children who have been kidnapped and mistreated during last 1 year. In South Sudan, more than 115,000 people are now being accommodated within United Nations camp. United Nations camp have never been designed to accommodate that many refugees. But the situation is very fragile. And I welcome the framework agreed by P5+1 and Iran to limit Iran's nuclear program and remove sanctions. Once a comprehensive agreement is finalized by the end of June, the United Nations will do our best to help implementation process, including through stringent monitoring and verification by the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. This breakthrough can also create space for efforts to address the many other serious security challenges in the region. We have all been horrified by the terrorist attacks and violence committed by groups such as Daesh, Al-Shabaab, and Boko Haram, and others. Your colleagues in the media have been among the victims, and I continue to stress the need for journalists to have the security they need to do their vital work. The United Nations is working to present a comprehensive plan of action to address this extremism, violent extremism, and terrorism. I'm going to submit it to the General Assembly this year. Next week in the United Nations, I, together with the President of the General Assembly, are going to convene a high-level thematic debate on reconciliation and tolerance, how we can address this violent extremism by leveling up, enhancing mutual respect and reconciliation. All these are very important issues. Without addressing these issues, we will not be able to have a sustainable peace and sustainable development of our society. We are working very closely with Alliance of Civilizations, and I have invited many world's renowned religious leaders. I believe that there are very important roles to be played by religious leaders and educators to teach their followers and their students what are the correct meaning of mutual respect and civilization and understandings and reconciliations and harmonious living together. This is very important issues. That's why, as I said, I'm going to present the comprehensive plan of action by this year. We must ensure that counterterrorism efforts respect human rights and international humanitarian law. As we have seen time and again, overreaction is the extremist best recruiting tool. Ladies and gentlemen, we must not let the smoke from these fires obscure longer-term opportunities. We must not be detracted by all these so-called headline news. There are many more important issues to make our world better for all, longer-term visions for development, sustainable development, and how to address these climate change issues. For the past 15 years, the world has been pursuing the Millennium Development Goals, an 8-point blueprint for reducing poverty. There has been remarkable progress. The world has lifted at least 700 million people from out of poverty. We have averted billions of deaths from malaria, tuberculosis, and AIDS. Billions of children, including girls, they have better access to education. Our target was to have all the school-aged children have a primary education, but unfortunately we still have 50 million school children out of school. We have to bring them back to school through a new vision. Our challenge is now to finish this job. That is why United Nations member states are working very hard to shape the post-2015 development agenda with a set of sustainable development goals. We have identified the 17 goals which will be able to address all the spectrums of our world, people-centered and planet-sensitive, economically, socially, and environmentally. Beyond the focus on shared prosperity and harmony with the planet, the new agenda will also emphasize the crucial role of justice, institutions, and fundamental freedoms. And for the first time, the goals will apply to all countries. Even the richest are witnessing rising inequality, and no country has ended violence and discrimination against the women. Tackling climate change is an urgent part of the picture. This climate change is a defining issue of our times. But international community has started late while they've been talking. They have not taken action now. We have to take action now. It is too late. It may be too late, but it may not be too late if we take action now. When I first became Secretary General in 2007, I first met President Bush. At that time, we were talking about what kind of agenda I should discuss with the President Bush. A lot of security and peace issues were raised. I wanted to raise these climate change issues, but I was advised by many senior advisors, you better not discuss with this President Bush. But I raised this issue. At that time, the world's press carried only one single line that I also discussed the climate change with the President Bush. But later that year in 2007, when the negotiators were working in Bali to adopt Bali roadmap, the first one which we adopted, that I was able to have that agreement with the help of President Bush, American government. I really appreciate this. That was an important step at that time. There are still some people who do not want to acknowledge there is a climate change. But there is a climate change. By any standard, the scientific evidences clearly tell us that the climate change is happening, is approaching much, much faster than one may expect. Moreover, no one can deny the phenomenal shift that are already underway. Investment in renewable energy are growing rapidly. The cost of solar and wind energy are plummeting and are often less expensive than fossil fuel alternatives. Not only is the science sound, so are the economics. Climate action pays. The markets of the future will reward sustainable solutions. Over the next 15 years, the world will make massive investment in energy and other infrastructures. We can do this sustainably, or we can lock ourselves into the path that raises the global thermostat higher still. The choice is quite clear. Scientists say we may be stepping at a tipping point. Depending upon how you put your feet, that we may be able to go toward the sustainable path, or we may be regretting. We may have to regret for our succeeding generations. Therefore, we must act now. The United States has just summited its intended climate action. I commend President Obama for his leadership and visions in announcing US-China joint statement in November last year. That was a major impact. And I also commend the European Union for their very solid visionary plans to address climate change. All this US-China and European Union's championing role are now putting all of us in the right path. I think all the countries, every country has a role to play. They have a commitment. I have been emphasizing that China has made important commitments. Governments, businesses, and people everywhere are more intent than ever on finding a common way forward. The world is now recognizing a basic truth of our times. We need to buy insurance for the planet. We must all be ambitious as we look to conclude an agreement at the climate change conference in Paris in December. There's a strong moral dimension to this effort. Today, I'd like to announce that I will visit Vatican later this month and meet with His Holiness Pope Francis to discuss common concern, including the encyclical on the environment that he plans to issue in the month ahead. I think this will be first time for any Secretary General to be invited by the Pope. For my part, I have invited Pope Francis to the United Nations, and also President Obama and all the leaders of the world to a special summit meeting in September at the United Nations, asking them to adopt this visionary and ambitious sustainable development agenda. And I'm sure that all the leaders will come and declare their visions to the world as a way of celebrating 70th anniversary of the United Nations. This week's meetings of the World Bank and IMF here in Washington are an important building block. Another key step will be the third International Conference on Financing for Development, which will be held in Addis Ababa next July. Ladies and gentlemen, we are the first generation that can end poverty, and we are the last generation to address climate change. This is a fact, and we must act now. In that regard, year 2015 is a year for global action, a year of big decisions, ambitious decisions for humanity. From safety to sustainability, the United Nations relies on the active engagement of the United States. I know from my own experience growing up in war-torn Korea, what a transformation the United States, working with the United Nations, can help make possible. I have seen in just the past years the remarkable solidarity of the United States with the people of Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone in coping with the outbreak of the Ebola crisis. The United Nations coordinated a wide-ranging response, and now we are within reach of our goal of zero case. Our goal is to get these countries to zero cases and remain zero cases, so that we will be able to declare that these countries and this world is Ebola-free. I'm going to meet the presidents of these three countries in Washington tomorrow, and we will discuss again how we can help those countries to be able to declare Ebola-free as soon as possible. At the same time, we have a very important mission to do. Recently, earlier this month, I have launched another high-level panel of independent leaders as well as experts to have a lessons learned process. What has gone wrong, what has been weak, and in case, unfortunately, if we have to experience another epidemic crisis, then how we can mobilize our efforts financially and providing logistical support to those countries. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll try to finish by saying that I will count on the United States to continue to support the work of the United Nations. As I said, when I was young, our country was very poor. I was just 6 years old when Korean War broke out. And we have seen the United Nations flags. And these United Nations brought not only security support, but social and economic assistance. And United Nations was the beacon of hope to us, to me. Now I'm humbled. Whenever I travel around the world, I still see many people who look to the United Nations as their beacon of hope. Now, without your help, United Nations cannot deliver. In the middle of this, United States can play a very important role, and that's why I'm speaking to the people of United States, and you may represent all different media organizations, but I really need the people of United States and government to provide generous support for humanitarian issues and also show some strong political leadership role. This year's 70th anniversary of the United Nations falls at a time when we face major decisions that will shape lives for generations to come. This is a time of test, but far more one of tremendous opportunities. As the distinctions between the national and international continue to fall away, we can and must come together to chart a course towards a safer and more sustainable future for all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, you have a very important role as a journalist. You are connecting between the United Nations and the world. The people should be enlightened by your news and by educating them what is happening now, but more importantly, how we should work together to make this world a better for all, where everybody's human dignity and human rights will be respected. And I count on your strong engagement and leadership. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary General. This year marks anniversaries, including the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II, and the 40th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. Yet we still see so many conflicts flaring up around the world, and you mentioned some of them in your speech. Has the world's ability to resolve conflict diplomatically improved since the end of the World War II and Vietnam, Or do these ongoing troubles show that diplomacy hasn't lived up to its promise?
I think we have many different means and tools to resolve conflict issues. We have, first of all, when there is actual fightings, we have peacekeeping operations. We maintain now 120,000 military, police, and civil servants who are working in 16 different hotspots. At the same time, we have a very dedicated and experienced mediation team, diplomatic facilitations. Preventive diplomacy is much more important, which we are using to prevent. When we see some symptoms of problems, we immediately send our expert mediating teams. We can send any place within 72 hours to the place where we see the symptoms. But sometimes, despite our diplomatic efforts, the violence may happen, and it has been such a way. But we are living, as I said, in a very much difficult situation, a troubled situation. But what is necessary at this time is a political will, how to resolve all these issues through dialogue in a peaceful way. And that's our most important priorities. Through this, we have been saving a lot of lives and protect marginalized group of people, human rights, particularly women and girls who have been physically abused of their human rights. But we will continue to improve our capacity to resolve these issues.
On the issue of Yemen, you called for a ceasefire in Yemen, yet the country remains fractured. Do you truly expect your call to be respected? And can there be stability in Yemen when the UN's envoy there is no longer in place?
I myself visited Yemen a couple of years ago when there was a heightened political environment where and when we are about to help them establish unity government through national dialogue. And then, as you are well aware, there's a Houthis and former President Saleh. They have used military means. That's the beginning of this crisis at this time. We were about to see the very harmonious resolution of this unity government. In that regard, I took note of what the Saudis and coalition of Gulf Cooperation Council members have taken military actions at the request of the Yemeni government and president. Now, with this 4 weeks into military operations, we have seen many casualties, civilians, and many people wounded, and destruction of infrastructures. This Yemen is one of the poorest countries. Still, they are destroying their future. Therefore, as a Secretary General, I have been urging all the times there should be an immediate cessation of violence and return to political dialogue. That's a firm principle. I still believe that the dialogue is the best option. Now, as you have already read, my special advisor, Jamal Benoma, has resigned. I'm now in the process of finding some other special advisor who can immediately be deployed for political solutions. Thank you.
Received several questions about Syria, including one saying the UN Security Council has received a video that details alleged chemical weapons use on civilians in Syria, and will the UN take any kind of specific action in response, but also questions about disarray in Syria and the war. What will it take to ultimately get to a solution in Syria, and does President Bashir al-Assad have to go?
I think you have asked almost all the aspects of Syrian questions. I have been really trying to address this issue during last 4 years, since the beginning of this crisis. I think March 2011. When it comes to chemical weapons, this is weapons of mass destruction, which is completely prohibited. Using chemical weapons is a crime against humanity. That's why for the first time, this Security Council, who have been divided completely during the last 4 years, was able to show their unity of power. The Security Council has adopted, upon my request, a strong resolution. And that's where we were able to see the destruction of chemical weapons. Now, all these facilities are now being destroyed, dismantled. We are very much concerned by the news that the Syrian government has been using chlorine and some other chemical weapons. The Security Council has taken this very seriously, and the OPCW has dispatched their expert to investigate this one. When it is sure that there is chemical weapons used, that we have to take a very decisive action to eliminate all this. It is absolutely unacceptable that chemical weapons are used to anybody. Now, then why the Syrian situation has not been resolved like this way? 4 years, during 4 years, minimum 220,000 people have been killed. 12 million people have been displaced and refugees. So more than half of their population have been affected. United Nations has been mobilizing all possible humanitarian agencies, providing humanitarian assistance to at least there's 4 million refugees who are now being accommodated in 5 countries, and also trying to provide the humanitarian assistance inside Syria. But there are many people where United Nations and Red Cross have not been able to have access because of fighting inside. This is quite a difficult situation. Then why this situation has been like this way? First of all, it's a completely divided the society. You say disarray. Divided among Syrian people. They are fighting between the two, the Syrian regime and opposition. Opposition themselves, they are all organized, divided. The regional powers are divided. And United Nations, particularly Security Council, is divided. Therefore, 3 most important parties are all divided. Then when there are so many divisions, then there's no way for us to address this issue. That is why recently I have instructed my special envoy, Stefan de Mistura, to do all possible efforts to relaunch the political dialogue, to implement the Geneva Communique as soon as possible. Now he is in the process of contacting and consulting with the key partners. I sincerely hope that we'll be able to have resumption of political dialogue as soon as possible. There is an issue of President Assad, what to do about him. There has been many different views, whether he should go out, whether he should be a part of these solutions. We'll have to see how to address this issue. It's a matter how, first of all, the matter to be decided by the people of Syria, but how to address this issue, then we have to continuously to discuss this matter.
You discussed climate change and the importance of pressing forward and the challenge of pressing forward. Does there need to be more leverage applied to get countries and companies to move forward on this issue? Should there be a consideration of civil penalties by respective governments for people who don't adopt policies in this area?
I have explained enough, therefore, if I say anything, it will be repetition. But about your last point of your question, if any country or any individual, any community would not be participating and engaging in our common global efforts, I'm afraid that they will be punished by natural disasters. There is no such rule that we punish or any sanction any government. But that's why I'm asking world leaders to first of all mobilize their political will. It's the most important part. The political leaders, they must have a firm conviction that this climate change is a top priority. There is some tendency to believe that whatever you invest for climate change is separate from your economic development. Economic development and investing in climate change is two sides of one coin. If you invest wisely in addressing climate change, that will help boost your national economy. And it will be beneficial. It's a wise investment. I'm going to ask the finance ministers who are now in Washington, D.C. to participate in IMF and World Bank annual conference, that they have to have a correct vision. Then it's not only the government leaders, business communities, and civil society leaders. They have to be all united. One of the big experiences which I have learned as a Secretary General is that without the tripartite partnership, government, business communities, and civil society, then nothing can be done. We need the business community's strong support. I am very much encouraged that it's now business leaders. They speak voluntarily themselves. Let's do this. We are ready to do that. When I convened the special summit meeting on climate change in September last year, there were many business leaders who committed at least $200 billion in one day. Then I'm asking world leaders to have a trajectory for $100 billion by 2020, and thereafter, annually $100 billion. I was able to have $10 billion last December as initial capitalization of Green Climate Fund. Happened to be, it is located in my country, Songdo, Korea. It's not because of that. This Green Climate Fund should be fully operationalized. We have to have $100 billion by 2020. And that's a way of giving confidence and trust to many developing worlds, so that they should be supported in their efforts to mitigation and adaptation, because most of these developing countries do not have capacity to mitigate and adapt to this changing situation. Therefore, it's only natural that developed world, OECD member states, they should be ready to provide technological and financial support. At the same time, the South-South cooperation is very important. Now there are many emerging economies like China, India, Brazil, South Africa. Those countries should also do their commensurable role in working together with the developed world. Therefore, I'm asking that the world leaders should show their political leadership so that business community and civil society will follow. And I'm asking, again, the United States, as richest, most resourceful country, should lead this campaign. Thank you.
Received some questions about journalists being held captive in some conflict zones. How could the UN better implement the UN Security Council Resolution 1738 on the protection of journalists covering conflicts? And it got a specific question about Jason Rezaian of the Washington Post. There are others, however, who are being held as well. Is there anything the UN can do in these situations?
Unfortunately, in the course of covering the news, we have seen many journalists who have even been killed and detained and arrested and harassed. This is not acceptable. This is a violation of freedom of expression. Therefore, it's important that, fundamentally important, that their freedom and access to news should be fully protected. As for specific case, I'm aware of this Rezaian case who has been detained by Iranian government. And I'm asking again that there should be a full protection and access to the legal and humanitarian assistance and access. It's important that wherever the charges may have been there, for any reporters and journalists, their freedom of expression and their right to the legal assistance should be fully protected. And that's, I'm again urging the authorities to take necessary actions on that.
Had several questions related to the UN effort to create a new set of sustainable development goals to be considered by the UN in September. How is the world going to pay for these goals? One questioner wants to know. And how will the UN ensure that these goals are well financed and successfully implemented?
There's sustainable development goals, which are now being negotiated in the United Nations, is two of the most important priorities. I call them twin priorities for the United Nations. As I said earlier in my remarks, the MDG, they have been the basic vision during last 15 years. After 15 years, we know that not all 8 goals have been achieved. Therefore, whatever has been unrealized, that will have to be carried over. But this time, this vision should be much broader and more comprehensive, addressing all the spectrums of our life, economically, socially, and environmentally. This vision should be people-centered and climate-sensitive and friendly. So we have to both address our human living and our planet Earth. If I may add, the way we are using all energies and resources seem to suggest that people may think that we have a 2-planet Earth, but we have only 1 planet Earth. we have to really care our nature. The nature does not wait for us. They just impact us. Therefore, it is a human being who have to adjust ourselves and be more sensitive to our nature. That's one important thing. And these Sustainable Development Goals, which have been identified 17 goals with many targets how to address. Then most important thing is that how to support these goals. We should have a robust mechanism to support so that these 17 goals can be implemented as we have envisioned. That's why United Nations is going to have a high-level conference in July in Addis Ababa. This will be international conference for financing for development. This is going to be very important. If we are not successful in this meeting, all these sustainable development goals or climate change, maybe just something in just like what we say, pie in the sky. Something nice, flowers in the pictures. We have to have a real, practical, implementable framework to address these issues. Therefore, this international conference on financing for development in Addis Ababa will be very much important. I'm asking the world leaders to lead their delegations and show their political will again.
We're almost out of time, but before I ask the last question, I want to remind our audience about upcoming speakers. Navy Secretary Ray Mabus will address the club April 30th. Vince Cerf, Chief Internet Evangelist for Google and a father of the Internet, will speak May 4th. Lieutenant General Michelle Johnson, the first woman to be Superintendent of the Air Force Academy, will speak May 8th. I'd now like to present our guest with the traditional National Press Club mug. And we're sure you've got plenty of coffee pots around the UN that might be able to put that to good use. And now, before we let you go, we want to end, we often end on a lighter note. And 4 years ago, you made a humorous and fictional video vignette showing yourself skateboarding on New York City's First Avenue and having a wild night out in the town. While we know that was just made up fun, when you do eventually get a break from trying to solve the world's problems, and this may be a ways into the future, we know, but what are 2 or 3 things that you plan to do to relax and not think about the world's problems?
Well, I saw that video. That was quite something very funny. I went on skateboarding, and even I danced the Gangnam Style at the time. But my skateboarding and Gangnam Style was a private one. But I think somebody must have had a very good hacker, because all this privacy has been leaked. I do not have much freer time, to be frank. During last 8.5 years, I have been extremely busy, as you may imagine. But sometimes I try to see action movie. That's the best way to get some tension free. I think 2 days ago, I welcomed a very special guest to my office. That's 007, Daniel Craig. I appointed him as United Nations Global Advocate for Elimination of mines and explosive hazard. he gladly accepted. And I am very much grateful for his using global star power. I told him, well, you are 007. I am 8th Secretary General of the United Nations, therefore I am 008. He said instantly, I will talk to my producer so that you can be 008. When I retire from my job, I will become 008 maybe. Then I told him that you have a license to kill. Now I'm giving you to something very important, humanitarian. I'm giving you a license to save, demining. Now, lastly, I have been married 45 years with my wife, and I may be my wife has been extremely patient, very much cooperative and understanding my busy work. And then when I retire, first of all, it may be a good idea if I bring my wife to a nice restaurant and enjoy something. But most importantly, I'm looking for the days when I'll be able to have more time with my grandchildren. When you have your kids, own kids, it's a responsibility. You have to be sometimes very tough and disciplined. But for grandchildren, you have only right to spoil them. And when I wanted to be strict, that does not work. In my case, all this strict rule will go out the window. And they are my boss, and therefore, I'm looking forward to the days when I will be just tension-free and completely free and spending more time with my family, particularly grandchildren. I thank you very much for this opportunity. I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary General. I'd like to ask our live audience to stay in your seats when I bring down the gavel, and please stay seated until the Secretary General leaves the room. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank the National Press Club staff, including its Journalism Institute and Broadcast Center, for organizing today's event. And if you would like a copy of this program or to learn more about the National Press Club, go to our website. That is press.org. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.